your family, your religion, and Rutgers basketball. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Big Ten podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Stevens. It is Tuesday, March 9th, and that means it is our State of the Program episode, postseason edition, as we look ahead to the Big Ten tournament, checking in with one of the member institutions around this glorious conference. And today, the focus, if you couldn't tell from the top of this episode, is all about Rutgers basketball. And I made a promise to our guest today, Aaron Breitman, the managing editor of SB Nation's On the Banks, that the next time he was back on the Locked On Big Ten show, we would be discussing happier times for the Scarlet Knights, and I think we have arrived at that positive point. So, Aaron, first off, thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ben, and you're a man of your word. You came through, and definitely happier times. It's been a roller coaster ride of a season, but here we are. It's the second week of March, and we know Rutgers is going dancing for the first time in 30 years, so it doesn't get much better than that.
I was going to say, I know how I feel. I think Rutgers is certainly in the NCAA tournament, snapping a 30-year streak since the Scarlet Knights last appeared. But are we in full-blown celebratory mode? Are we cautiously optimistic? How is everybody feeling around the Rutgers basketball program?
I think, to be honest with you, it's a little bit of a mix. For someone like myself, I followed the program since the late 80s. I was at the 1989 championship game where they beat Penn State to clinch the bid, where they weren't supposed to that year. 91 was the last year. So we've been through a lot. I really believe that this team has carried a burden with them that no other college basketball team has had to carry this year, on top of everything else with COVID. I'm so happy for the players that they came through. I think no matter what happens from here on out, it's really gravy. I really believe that. We hope that they have a run in them. I will get into it, but I believe they do. But even if they don't, they've accomplished something that no team has accomplished in so long, and I think they've really restored pride. And I think, in a way, the fact that the fan base isn't overjoyed completely shows how they have raised the expectations of this program, which is a whole nother way to measure progress. And, Pico said it a couple weeks ago. He said, our fans expect us to win every game now. And if that's not a display of how far the program has come, it's really amazing.
And you mentioned it briefly right there. You are a graduate of Rutgers. You have been following this team since they last made the NCAA tournament. You cover them with the best as the managing editor for SB Nation's On the Banks. What does this mean for Rutgers basketball getting back to the big dance?
I mean, it means everything. It's, you can't, if you wrote a movie or a script of all the negative things that this program has been through, I don't think it would sell, because it's not believable. But between a coach getting fired for naked free throws, for the Mike Rice scandal, throwing basketballs at people, you have Epic losing, you have a basketball coach getting fired for screaming obscenities at a baseball coach. We've had every top recruit in New Jersey over the last year, so many stories of recruits leaving the state or considering Rutgers. I mean, we've had so many bad breaks. There's the Jay Wright, saga that potentially he was really close to. I mean, we've had so many close calls and so many instances of heartbreak. I could probably rattle off 20 transfers that have left Rutgers and gone dancing. So this fan base has been through quite a bit. And what Steve Pikiell's done, just in terms of what he inherited and where they are now. And if, listen, we can't ignore last year. I know the NCAA tournament didn't happen, but if you look at it in the way life typically is, we'd be talking about the second NCAA tournament appearance in 5 years for him, the first back-to-back, since the 70s for Rutgers. So, I mean, it's even more extraordinary than just being the first time based on what they did last year. I think if you look at that 2-year sample size, it's really remarkable. And I think it's going to take a little bit. I think we need to get through this month before it all kind of sinks in, at least for me personally. But it's certainly the next couple of weeks, 3 weeks maybe, will be quite a ride.
In the clincher that I think did it on Saturday, the game against Minnesota on the road in the barn, an overtime thriller, ups and downs, peaks and valleys. Everybody was going through it in that game against the Gophers on Saturday. Kind of the embodiment of Rutgers' home stretch of this season. They finished splitting their last 6 games. They went 3-3 down the home stretch of the regular season. But in your mind, Aaron, how did they pull it off on Saturday to clinch a bid to the NCAA tournament?
It really was a microcosm of the season, that game. I mean, they were cruising. They were up 14 in the second half. It just didn't seem like Minnesota had anything left in the tank. And, it all for Rutgers. It all starts with defense and rebounding, and when they don't do those things as well as they can, they get in trouble. And that's what happened. Minnesota got back into it that way. Jacob Young with arguably the biggest play in 30 years, 15 seconds or 18 seconds to go, tie game. Minnesota got the rebound. They had three on none, and he somehow amazingly intercepted that pass at midcourt, saved the game. And there was no surprise. I thought that he basically took over the game in overtime. And really, he's at his best when when he's a distributor first. And I think yes, he got that first basket, but then he had 2 key assists. And when he's looking to get everyone involved and not just be a gunner, that's when he is at his absolute best, and that's when Rutgers is at their best as well. So it was really remarkable. The way they did it, it's never easy being a Rutgers fan, so it was not surprised at all that they did it this way, just in terms of how the season ended, and then in terms of how that actual game ended. But at the end of the day, you know what, they did it, and I think it's. I was looking at a stat. Over the last 2 years, only 6 teams in the Big Ten have avoided a losing season in conference play. 3 have had winning records in Ohio State, Iowa, and Illinois. And then 3 others went 10-10 one year, and you're talking Michigan and Rutgers and Wisconsin. So I mean, you're talking about 5 of the best teams in the conference and Rutgers to do what they've done the last 2 years is really amazing. So I mean, we're talking about a Big Ten tournament. This will be the first time Rutgers didn't play on the first day of the Big Ten. So I get a little worried that Rutgers fans kind of miss some of the steps that are happening along the way, because they never won at Minnesota before, and look at who did lose at Minnesota this year. Obviously not the same team on Saturday, but still, when you're Rutgers, every little bit of history counts, and I think that this team is very aware of that. And I think it's been good and bad this year that they are, but it's certainly, the steps along the way that have happened really are amazing.
Saturday was a microcosm of the regular season overall. Rutgers started off a perfect 6-0, were ranked as high as 11th in the country, then went on a 5-game losing skid, responded with a 4-game winning streak, and then it was very back and forth through the finale of the regular season. Aaron, how would you sum up this regular season overall for Rutgers?
A roller coaster of emotions for sure. I think, I wrote about it on Saturday. I've never seen a team that, has looked so good and honestly so bad at times too. And I think it really is a reality of the situation they're living in, essentially being quarantined since the summer. And I really do think the history has weighed on them. They've been very vocal about being aware of the history. They made a big deal about winning that game at Maryland to start conference play. Rutgers had never won the opening game of a regular season Big Ten game or season. So, they were happy about being 1-0. So certainly the weight of 30 years, and I asked them about that. Geo Baker admitted, he feels like a weight's off his shoulders. I think that it certainly weighed on them these last couple of weeks. And it makes me optimistic that moving forward now, now that they've done it, essentially, they really should be able to play much more freely. And I think it's going to help them. I really do. I think they feel like they're going to be playing with house money now. And I think they have the type of, obviously I'm biased, but I think they have the type of style. They play defense. They have a guy like Young that can create, and they have veterans. And I think that they have the type of team that could make, a significant run this postseason.
Yeah, I think you could see history weighing on them a little bit, some of that pressure starting to add up, and then the relief after getting the overtime win at Minnesota. And like you mentioned, last year as well, in the season that did not count for the NCAA tournament, but having to go on the road and beat a Purdue team to end out the regular season, Rutgers is capable of pulling off some wins when their backs are against the wall and they need to get it done. So speaking with Aaron Breitman, the managing editor for SB Nation's On the Banks, let's move forward now, because Rutgers will be the 7th seed in the Big Ten tournament, playing on Thursday, taking on the 10 seed Indiana. What do you expect out of that game against the Hoosiers, who Rutgers has already beaten twice this season?
I think they're going to be energized. I think they should have all the confidence in the world. They know they can beat Indiana. They've outplayed them twice now. I think they match up very well against Indiana. It's a Steve Pikiell special. When you play a team that has 1 or 2 guys and that's it in a way in terms of being dangerous, that's a perfect matchup for Steve Pikiell and his defense. Chase Jackson Davis had a much better second game than he did the first game, but I really think that they dared Indiana to beat them from the perimeter, and they couldn't do it. And I think this time, Indiana's been hot from 3, but I think you're going to see them but with ball pressure on the guards and try to get them to drive and score inside. And Rutgers has great 2-point percentage defense. Miles Johnson has been amazing. I'm really hoping he wins Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. I think he deserves it. He's got the top block rate, top defensive rebounding rate in the conference this year. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that this is definitely a very good matchup for them. The whole thing about beating teams 3 times in the season is really a myth. I don't know if you saw that stat, but I think 72% of the time over the last decade, that team wins a third time, and the matchups don't change. So Rutgers matches up well against Indiana. Certainly not going to be an easy game, and they can't get lethargic or rest on their laurels. But I think that they, with their defense and their ability to rebound, I think that this is certainly a game they should win. And I would love to see them have a second shot at Illinois after beating them early this season. And really be playing with house money at that point.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to ask if you put any credence into the idea of, can you beat a team 3 times in a season? You say that they can. They have Indiana in that first opening matchup in the Big Ten tournament coming on Thursday. So what do you think is a key for Rutgers, not only for the Big Ten tournament, but for the Big Dance as well, to find that momentum they had early on in the year and play their best basketball now in March?
To be honest with you, I think it's confidence. I think that what we saw down the stretch was they would miss a few shots early in games, and they would start dragging their heads a little bit, which was really concerning. And they suffered on the defensive end. I think now, they have that weight off their shoulders. I think offensively, they need to be smarter. They tend to settle for threes off of, just passing the ball around the perimeter early on in games. When they're able to drive, get penetration, and kick out that way, they've been shooting much better from 3 that way. Jacob Young is really the key. When he is looking to drive, even a few times against Minnesota, he'd get in the lane and he wasn't looking for a shot first, which really was a positive. And I think that Geo Baker too, he was able against Indiana last time to get in the lane, kick it out. Ron Harper, he's the type of guy that needs to catch the ball in the flow of the offense and step into shots. So, getting him going is certainly key, but they need to get some kind of consistency offensively. And I really think it goes back to confidence and playing smart.
You mentioned that this Rutgers team does have a lot of experience. Geo Baker and Jacob Young are seniors. Ron Harper Jr. and Miles Johnson have been in this program a lot. How much do you think that's a benefit for Rutgers as they get ready for this postseason?
I think it's a real benefit. I think, they've been through a lot the last 2-3 years on top of what they've been going through with COVID and everything. And I think, this really is the culmination of everything they've worked towards. And I think that, getting there, the grind of getting there has taken its toll. And I really think that the experience that they have to wrestle on it, they know each other really well. I think they've been in bad spots before. They've been down. And they fought back. And I think, one thing you mentioned with Purdue last year, this year, Minnesota, for me, that's how I think this group should ultimately be remembered. Obviously breaking the 30-year drought of the NCAA tournament, but really 2 years in a row, go on the road, last game of the season, NCAA tournament bid on the line, and they went on the road in overtime, back-to-back years. For me, that's, at the end of the day, they came through when it mattered most. They were talking about a program that, another thing this year, they won 4 Big Ten road games for the first time ever. Obviously no fans, but still, we're talking about a team that won 16 Big Ten games in 5 years, and they've won 21 the last 2. So this group has done so much, and I really, really hope, no matter what, they should be, they shouldn't have to buy a drink in New Brunswick ever again. But even so, I really hope they get kind of their last stand on the spotlight, where they really come through one more time on the biggest stage. So I hope they get at least a win in the NCAA tournament. Rutgers hasn't had a win since 1983. So a good showing in the Big Ten tournament can only help. And I really can't get that feeling out of my head. I think that they have the makeup with that experience to be able to, they're built to be able to pull an upset or two.
So depending on what happens in the Big Ten tournament, Rutgers seed line probably right now, as a lot of bracketologists see it, an 8 seed, a 9 seed, maybe even a 10 seed if the bracket shakes out a different way. What do you think the ceiling is for Steve Peichel and company when it gets to the big dance?
Well, like you said, it's really going to matter how they do. I think the Indiana win, it's really more, I think, about falling back versus moving forward. I think, they'll hold serve if they get a win there. I think, if they lose that game, they'll drop a little bit. There is the, argument of, are they better off in a way falling back a little bit, maybe in that 10, 11 seed, versus getting stuck in that brutal 8-9 game because they're going to be pitted with Baylor or Gonzaga simply because they won't be pitted with Illinois and if Michigan gets the 1 seed too. So I'm honestly at the point now with let the college basketball gods decide what they decide. I'm okay with it. I think once you start going through those scenarios, you drive yourself crazy. And I think Rutgers just needs to play. And I think if they can beat Illinois, I think they match up well against Illinois. I know Illinois is playing better than any team in the country right now. And I'm not by any means saying Rutgers will win that game. But if you look at recent history with these two teams and these rosters, Rutgers has done really well against Illinois. They won the last two, lost by 3 the game before that without Joe Baker. So they're going to have confidence in the world against Illinois. You win that game, you move up, I think, another slot. I think they probably the bet. If they made a crazy run this week at the Big Tens, maybe they get up to a 6. But I think really the best they can do is a 7 seed. Worst case, maybe they fall back to an 11. Like I said, the 8-9 game would be tough. People like to pit them against UConn or Oregon in the bracket, which would be against, an old Big East rival, or against Eugene Omoruyi, the transfer at Oregon. So personally, we're going to have enough emotions to deal with when they play in the NCAA tournament. I don't think it really helps them to have even more emotion going into a game. But we'll see. I think you let the chips fall where they may and just let them play. And I really do think they're going to represent well.
Like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, Rutgers getting to the big dance for the first time in 30 years. And for people like you who have been following this program for that long to see them get to this pinnacle, Aaron Breitman, how are you going to be celebrating this occasion in March, not only in the Big Ten tournament, but as we get to the NCAA tournament as well?
Well, to be honest with you, it's a challenge running a site, and I'm on the post game calls with Pikel and everything, so I have to be able to channel my emotions and kind of exhale hours later after I get through everything. But it's certainly in my head I'm not nearly as composed as I try to express. But yeah, it's going to be wild. I think at the end of it, like I said, just sit back and pour a glass of scotch and soak it all in. But it's going to be it's a little disappointing with obviously COVID and the fan restrictions and everything, and I potentially could go out there, but I have a family, I probably won't be able to make it. But just having the experience that we've had this year, I don't think it'll hit me for a long time.
I think it's great for Scarlet Knights fans to have high expectations for the basketball team, but like Aaron Breitman has mentioned, also be appreciative of the fact they have got to this point, get back to the big dance for the first time in 3 decades. Now, I don't know a lot about the bars in New Brunswick. My good friend George Bilecki, who has been on this podcast many a time, is a New Jersey native. He has told me about this place called Stuff Your Face in New Brunswick. It's a staple near Rutgers' campus. You said no Scarlet Knights on this team should have to buy a drink ever. What about buy a calzone ever again for the rest of their life?
Whatever they want. I think they'll be treated very well, as they should. I think that to be honest, that's part of the heartbreaking thing of this season, and I think it's affected them. I mean, I've never seen a team like last year from a Rutgers perspective that connected with fans as well as this team did. So for them not to have that this year, not to be on campus, having a normal life, and seeing other students, and it's really a shame that they didn't get that. But at the same time, I think that they should reap the rewards for the rest of their lives, around campus for sure. But yeah, it's a Stuff Your Face. Certainly, it's a definitely a place you got to go to if you're ever on campus.
I got to try it. I'll get out there one time. I want to see the rack bumping back like we're used to seeing. It would have been electric this year, but I think these Rutgers players will be remembered very fondly in the history of the Scarlet Knights basketball program. A guy I think of very fondly, Aaron Breitman, the managing editor for SB Nation's On the Banks, back on the Locked On Big Ten podcast to celebrate the good times surrounding Rutgers basketball. Aaron, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again, Ben.